The Committee on Homeland Security Subcommittee on Oversight and Management Efficiency will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to examine mismanagement of the Federal Protective Services vehicle fleet. The chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. And before that, just on an administrative note, my counterpart, the ranking member, Ms. Watson-Coleman, is on her way. We've been told that no one will object to the opening statement, so we're going to just proceed. If she does make it in time, she may make an opening statement. If she does not, we may adjourn at that point so that I can go vote, and as soon as votes are complete, we will come back and re-adjourn the hearing and move forward from there. So that's kind of just to give you an idea. You can plan your bathroom breaks accordingly. All right. The Federal Protective Service has a vitally important mission to protect federal facilities, including federal employees, contractors, and visitors at those facilities. FPS secures approximately 9,500 facilities nationwide. Watchdogs have released numerous reports in recent years criticizing how FPS has managed its contract guard program and conducted facility security assessments. In October, the Inspector General released a scathing report titled, "The FPS Vehicle Fleet is Not Managed Effectively." The report reads like a laundry list of poor, and this is my editorial, what seems to me gratuitous management decisions. According to the Inspector General, the FPS wasted over $2.5 million in fiscal year 2014 on its vehicle fleet due to numerous management failures. Specifically, FPS management did not justify the need for more vehicles than officers, use of larger sport utility vehicles, officers' authorization to drive from home to work in the Washington, D.C. area, and discretionary equipment added to vehicles. FPS leased over 100 vehicles more than it had officers, and that's every single FPS officer was, and that's after every single FPS officer was assigned a vehicle. Now, I'm sure sheriffs and chiefs of police back home in Pennsylvania would love to have such a budget and such latitude, and I can tell you, as a service member, and gentlemen, I will thank you in advance for your service, but as a service member who has served downrange and had to hoof it 8 miles from where I was sleeping to where I was operating because I didn't have a vehicle, we sure would have loved to have vehicles to complete our mission. In addition, FPS chose to lease more expensive sport utility vehicles even though 2013 component guidance stated that a sedan was preferred. FPS could have saved over $1 million had it used sedans as opposed to SUVs. FPS officials explained that the larger capacity was needed to store officer equipment. However, the IG found that most officers did not have a majority of the equipment stored in their vehicles. In fact, some of the equipment wasn't even issued. Another management failure was the lack of justification in allowing officers in the National Capital Region, the NCR, to drive from home to work. Officers in the NCR drove more miles in their government-issued SUVs commuting than actually performing their assigned duties and failed to accurately report whether their mileage was justified. And I find that quite telling, gentlemen. The IG found that in certain instances, on-duty activities were reported as after-hours responses. The report also found that FPS overpaid an estimated $35,000 in monthly charges, for equipment packages that added extras such as bike racks and wireless security systems for the vehicles. The IG stated that FPS made ad hoc undocumented decisions regarding its vehicle fleet and was not in compliance with federal and departmental requirements. FPS failed to put rigorous controls in place to prevent waste, and the limited safeguards that were in place were not followed. Officers did not appropriately document their mileage, and almost all of FPS's records did not match records in the General Services Administration's system. In 25 cases in particular, FPS reported vehicles having negative mileage, which I would hope would get somebody's attention. You know, from my standpoint, at some point, I'd like DHS and FPS to explain to the members how a vehicle has negative miles on it. Director Patterson has signed a new policy to address some of the IG's findings and intends to put new systems in place to better oversee the use of FPS vehicles. I will tell you, Director, in my opinion, in this one humble opinion, one individual's humble opinion, new policies aren't, without changing some of the core standards and requirements here, it's just not going to be good enough. But the American taxpayer deserves much better. Washington bureaucrats may wonder why this subcommittee is holding a hearing on an area that is such a small part of DHS's overall budget. The management failures and outright abuse outlined in the IG's report demonstrate a culture of waste by DHS regarding taxpayer, this is your neighbors, taxpayer money. That is reprehensible and it is unacceptable. Since the IG only reviewed 1 year of data, it's safe to say FPS wasted millions more in previous years. And listen, I don't use the term wasted lightly. I'd rather say spent. But in my opinion, and based on this report, I can assume, and I think America can assume, it's been wasted. Maybe even tens of millions, because we don't know how long this is. I don't know how long this has been going on like this. Putting a new policy in place does not cut it. DHS must hold employees themselves, that wasting taxpayer dollars accountable. I'm sorry, I'm reading that sentence over again. I read it last night. It doesn't make sense to me right now, quite honestly. Point is that we must hold ourselves as employees of the federal government, whether elected, whether appointed, or whether hired. We must hold ourselves accountable and seek for the best for the taxpayers that we're beholden to. We all must do that, whether or not there's a directive to do it from up above. We must take it upon ourselves, and the oath that we took when we signed up for this mission, to do the best we can, regardless of what somebody above us is telling us. We know better, we must do better. Every dollar wasted on mismanagement is one less that goes to actually protecting the public. And I'm just thinking about events in the last 24 hours. I know they didn't happen at a federal facility, but God help us when one does and somebody comes to the committee and says, well, we need more money to protect these facilities and these people. We can look at ourselves, and look, if I had a mirror in front of me, I'm telling you I'd be looking at myself too, but I know I'm looking at you two gentlemen in particular. But this is part of that. That's what we're talking about when these things happen. So we need to make sure that our dollars are spent most wisely. The American people will not stand for such mismanagement practice. Votes have been called on the House floor, so without objection, the subcommittee stands in recess subject to the call of the chair, and we will reconvene following the vote series. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Chair now recognizes the ranking minority member of the subcommittee, the gentlelady from New Jersey, Mrs. Watson Coleman, for her statement.
Thank you, Chairman Perry, for holding today's hearing. Thank you, Inspector General Roth, Director Patterson, and Mr. Shalecki, I like that even better, for your testimony today. The Federal Protective Service, a subcomponent of the National Protection and Programs Directorate, provides integrated security and law enforcement services to more than 9,500 federal facilities nationwide. FPS fulfills a critical mission, one rooted in protecting essential infrastructure, federal buildings, and its occupants. While the presence of FPS is imperative to the protection of federal facilities, it is equally important that FPS performs its everyday functions in an efficient manner with appropriate management oversight. Currently, EPS manages a fleet of approximately 1,100 vehicles at a cost of $10.7 million. These vehicles assist FPS officers in their coverage of federal facilities and allows them to store and carry their essential law enforcement equipment. The Department of Homeland Security Office of the Inspector General recently investigated FPS's management of its vehicle fleet and concluded that FPS is not managing its vehicle fleet effectively, specifically citing expensive equipment packages, the overuse of sports utility vehicles, and a lack of consistent department oversight in fleet management. Even though FPS has more than 100 enforcement vehicles than full-time officers, FPS was unable to provide the Inspector General with the justifications for neither the surplus nor its overall methodology in ordering vehicles for the fleet. In the D.C. region, 57% of the fleet's vehicles' overall mileage was considered home-to-work mileage, yet FPS could not provide sufficient justification to the Inspector General for the approximately 1.2 million home-to-work miles driven in fiscal year 2014. The Inspector General further observed some FPS vehicles did not contain the necessary equipment to fulfill its daily mission, including gas mask, protective suits, and riding gear. In response to this particular finding, FPS stated that oftentimes equipment is unavailable and it sometimes takes several months for an officer to be fully stocked. Even more troubling is the Inspector General's conclusion that the Department of Homeland Security does not sufficiently oversee FPS fleet management to ensure FPS complies with all federal and department guidelines. Neither the department's fleet manager nor NPPD consistently review FPS's use of the GSA vehicle allocation methodology, nor do they review the justifications for having additional law enforcement administrative vehicles, retaining underutilized vehicles, and adding discretionary upgrades. This lack of management resulted in FPS's overpaying GSA for law enforcement equipment packages. There is a critical linkage between the department's operational effectiveness and critical national security missions on the one hand and the effective management of resources and requirements by DHS leader on the other. These findings demonstrate a culture of lack of management and disregard for resources that FPS one grounded in collection of fees from agencies occupying the government's facilities. These lapses in oversight, accountability, and preparedness must be addressed and corrected. I look forward to hearing from each of you as to Mr. Roth, your findings, and to Mr. Patterson and Mr. Shalecki, those improvement mechanisms and systems and accountability measures that you've put in place. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back my time.
Chair thanks the gentlewoman. Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today. The witnesses' entire written statements will appear in the record, and the chair will introduce all of the witnesses first and then recognize each of you for your testimony. And I just simply must note at this time, and again apologize for, I find it fascinating and somewhat ironic that we're here to, in a position of oversight to make sure that you maintain the standard, and we couldn't seem to maintain the standard of not wasting your time today. For that and the rest of my colleagues, I do apologize. With that, the Honorable John Roth assumed the post of Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security in March 2014. Previously, Mr. Roth served as the Director of the Office of Criminal Investigations at the Food and Drug Administration and as an Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan. Welcome, Mr. Roth. Mr. L. Eric Patterson was appointed the Director of Federal Protective Service a subcomponent of the National Protection and Programs Directorate at the Department of Homeland Security in September 2010. Mr. Patterson previously served as the Deputy Director of the Defense Counterintelligence and Human Intelligence Center at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Mr. Patterson is a retired United States Air Force Brigadier General with 30 years of service. Sir, we acknowledge and thank you for your service. Mr. Thomas Chalecki, correct, is the Deputy Chief Readiness Support Officer at the Department of Homeland Security. His office is responsible for integrating mission support functions such as logistics, real property, and transportation, among other areas, across DHS components. Prior to his current position, Mr. Chalecki oversaw the integration of mission support functions at the U.S. Coast Guard. He recently retired from the Air Force Reserve with the rank of Colonel. And, sir, we also acknowledge and thank you for your service. Chairman, thank you for all being here today. The Chair recognizes Mr. Roth for his opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Perry, Ranking Member Watson-Coleman, and other members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me here today to discuss our work on FPS. In February of this year, I testified before you and highlighted the significant challenges that the department faces in attempting to exert some oversight over components within DHS. I stated that sometimes components simply disregard DHS policies, which hampers operations and leads to wasteful spending. I urge that DHS must strengthen its efforts to integrate management operations under a governing structure capable of effectively overseeing and managing programs that cross component lines. We have seen this in acquisition management, in radio interoperability, in DHS aircraft management, and in the DHS vehicle fleet. Our most recent audit is a perfect example of the problem. We identified significant issues regarding the management of the FPS vehicle fleet. As a result, FPS missed cost savings of more than $2.5 million out of a total expenditure of $10.7 million. First, our audit found that FPS has more vehicles than justified. In fiscal 2014, FPS had 100 more law enforcement vehicles than full-time law enforcement positions. This actually understates the issue because at the time they had fewer officers employed than positions. The actual number of excess vehicles was about 260. FPS has not conducted an analysis to determine the number of spare vehicles it needs for the size of its fleet. In addition, FPS leased 32 administrative vehicles for mission support functions, but has not justified leasing these vehicles as the most cost-effective option. FPS has not justified leasing vehicles larger and more expensive than necessary to support its mission. 93% of FPS's total fleet were SUVs. SUVs, according to our analysis, cost about 15% more than sedans and are more expensive to operate. Contrary to department policy, FPS did not formally validate its need for larger vehicles to meet mission requirements. Additionally, FPS officers appear to use the vehicles to commute to and from work without justification. Nearly 57% of the fleet's overall miles that are driven are commuting miles. In the National Capital Region, most officers are not required to respond to after-hours incidents because this region employs rotational shifts that are on duty 24 hours a day. Additionally, we found that officers erroneously reported on-duty activities as after-hour responses. This provided an inaccurate picture of actual after-hour responses and resulted in FPS using inaccurate and unreliable data to support its home-to-work reauthorization request. Additionally, FPS did not accurately record the miles driven by their fleet. We compared FPS's internal records against those reported to the General Services Administration from which those vehicles were leased, and found significant inaccuracies or incomplete information pertaining to total miles driven and home-to-work mileage. In fact, of the 192 records, the sample that we collected, 189 of them had inaccurate or missing information, a 98% error rate. FPS has not properly justified the number, type, and use of its current fleet is necessary to carry out its mission, and therefore is not in compliance with federal law and department requirements. We determined that 49% of FPS's leased vehicles showed fewer than 12,000 miles in fiscal 2014, therefore not meeting DHS's utilization policy, and there was no documented justification for retaining them. Sadly, in June of this year, we notified FPS and the Department of a lack of justification for FPS's current vehicle fleet operation. Nevertheless, a little over a month after that notification, DHS proceeded with an order with GSA to replace about 16% of FPS vehicles, the majority of which were SUVs. We recognize that the department has made significant improvements to fleet management and home-to-work transportation authorizations in particular, and we commend the department for taking these steps to address the need for right-sizing, but we believe additional actions may be necessary to improve its effectiveness. Without policies that afford fleet managers definitive enforceable authority, components will continue to operate as a business-as-usual mentality with no assurances that they are operating optimal fleets. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared statement. I welcome any questions you or other members of the committee may have.
Chair, thanks, Mr. Roth. Chair now recognizes Mr. Patterson for your opening statement.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Perry and Ranking Member Watson-Coleman, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Eric Patterson, and I am the Director of the Federal Protective Service, and I am honored to testify today regarding the management and operations of the FPS vehicle fleet. FPS is charged with protecting and delivering integrated law enforcement and security services to more than 9,500 federal facilities nationwide and safeguarding more than 1.4 million daily occupants and visitors. And as the committee is undoubtedly aware, 2015 has been a very operationally active year for our organization, necessitating heavy use of our fleet. On October 28th of 2014, in response to continued calls for attacks on the homeland, military and law enforcement personnel and other government officials from ISIS and other terrorist organizations, Secretary Johnson initiated Operation Blue Surge, directing the Federal Protective Service to enhance its presence and security at federal facilities nationwide. FPS has sustained an enhanced operational tempo ever since. Additionally, FPS responded to other sensitive events and incidents throughout the year, including civil unrest in Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore, Maryland, and the trial of the Boston Marathon bomber, shootings at military recruiting stations in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and the active shooter incidents in Suitland, Maryland, and Lower Manhattan, where 2 FPS contract protective security officers lost their lives in the line of duty. The Federal Protective Service appreciates the recent work of the Department of Homeland Security Office of the Inspector General in conducting a review of the administration of the FPS vehicle fleet and for recommending additional steps we take to manage our fleet more effectively. While at the conclusion of the review, the IG did not issue any recommendations to FPS directly or direct FPS to make changes to the total number of or vehicle types in its inventory, the report did conclude that FPS could and should improve its vehicle fleet management program. Specifically, the report recommended that DHS and MPPD work with FPS to review an existing vehicle lease agreement with GSA, formally document and validate fleet management decisions regarding an upcoming lease agreement, and ensure compliance with federal laws, regulations, and asset management best practices. We take the recommendations of this report very seriously and are working with DHS and MPPD fleet managers to help develop policies to control associated fleet costs while meeting our law enforcement mission requirements. In fact, new procedural updates have already been developed to address the recommendations identified in the recent OIG report and will help to ensure a robust oversight of the department's vehicle fleet going forward. Specifically, in response to the IG's recommendation, FPS implemented a comprehensive fleet management directive in August 27, 2015. The directive provides for an effective and efficient fleet management program and establishes standard methodology for fleet acquisition, leasing, and management oversight. Additionally, FPS has finalized a methodology for spare vehicle management to better document and validate that the number and type of spare vehicles on hand at any given time are appropriate given mission needs. FPS will continue to work with MPPD to develop and implement a formal process to document and validate fleet management decisions to ensure alignment with MPPD and DHS guidance. The department is also modernizing its vehicle allocation methodology, which will help to validate the efficient use of vehicles department-wide in order to better meet the essential mission of protecting and securing our homeland in an ever-evolving and complex threat environment. Further, the Department is revising its motor vehicle fleet management instruction in order to enhance department-level oversight of its motor vehicle program, for example, by requiring mandatory reviews of all motor vehicle acquisitions. Finally, in order to resolve the IG's concerns regarding potential overpayments, FPS and GSA are working together to ensure a common understanding of leasing arrangements and billing processes so that future decisions provide the best value to the American people. I am confident that our collective efforts will result in improved documentation, decision-making, and management oversight of the FPS vehicle fleet. In closing, I would like to acknowledge and thank the distinguished members of this committee for the opportunity to testify today. The Federal Protective Service remains committed to utilizing sound management practices in support of its mission to provide safety, security, and a sense of well-being to the thousands of visitors and federal employees who work and conduct business in our facilities every day. I would be pleased to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Chair now recognizes Mr. Chalecki for his opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Perry, Ranking Member Watson Coleman, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm Tom Chalecki, and I've been the Deputy Chief Readiness Support Officer for almost 4 years. Our office is responsible for policy and oversight of all DHS real property, mission support operations within the National Capital Region, environment and sustainability, personal property, and mobile assets to include aviation and marine assets and the motor vehicle fleet. I assumed control of the vehicle program almost a year ago when we established the Office of Assets and Logistics. I take a department-wide view of mission support and oversight of the DHS vehicle fleet. For a law enforcement agency like DHS, properly maintained and equipped vehicles provided in sufficient numbers are the tools of the trade. DHS has the second largest cabinet-level fleet with over 56,000 vehicles at its peak in 2011. Only the Department of Defense fleet is larger. From its peak, the fleet has been steadily reduced every year to where it is today at 52,000. This 8% reduction is largely attributed to the development and implementation of a department-wide vehicle allocation methodology, or VAM, in 2012. This helped establish a vehicle fleet baseline and started us on the process of right-sizing the fleet. Upon assuming overall responsibility of the fleet program, it was clear to me we needed to strengthen our policies and improve oversight of the DHS fleet program. To accomplish this, we first needed a clear picture of how many and what types of vehicles we have, how they were being used, and how they support the DHS mission. This required us to focus on 3 things. First, timely, reliable, transparent data. Second, strengthened policy guidance. And finally, clear business processes where the roles, responsibilities, and authorities of each level of the department are understood. Regarding improved data collection, our office has implemented a single centralized system of record for the department vehicle fleet through our Consolidated Asset Portfolio and Sustainment Information System, or CAPSIS. This system, which is essentially a data warehouse, consolidates information directly from existing component information systems and provides the fleet management team with important information such as vehicle inventory, cost, and utilization. Each component is required to submit updated information monthly. The Chief Readiness Support Office is responsible for developing and distributing fleet policy to the components, who have the delegated authority to administer their motor vehicle fleet programs subject to the direction, oversight, and policies issued by the department. To clarify and strengthen the DHS fleet manager's authority and ability to ensure compliance with departmental guidance, we substantially revised both the DHS Fleet Instruction Manual and the Home to Work Instruction Manual. Improvements include more frequent and more accurate data collection, review and approval by our office of all vehicle leases and purchases, and stronger justifications for home to work authorizations. These revised instructions form the foundation to improve and clarify the roles, responsibilities, and authorities throughout the vehicle program. In addition, we will carry out a new vehicle allocation methodology in 2017, which, when coupled with our improved data collection, will allow us to further right-size the DHS fleet and better control costs. We have also collected a year of quarterly home-to-work data, which enables the department to better implement, monitor, and improve the fair and efficient use of home-to-work transportation throughout the enterprise. As we go forward with oversight for the DHS vehicle fleet, there are 2 challenges to consider. First, each component has a unique mission and therefore employs and operates their respective fleets differently. A Border Patrol agent monitoring the southwest border uses his or her vehicle very differently than an ICE agent performing an undercover operation or an FPS agent responding to an incident at a federal facility. I'm charged with the responsible oversight of the DHS vehicle fleet at an enterprise level, but must always be cognizant of the mission needs at the component and unit level. Second, we cannot allow ourselves to focus exclusively on fleet reductions as an end in themselves. Our attention has to be on right-sizing the fleet, that is, providing the minimum number and appropriate type of vehicles needed to perform the mission. This relies on first understanding, then meeting component mission requirements. With those challenges in mind, we continue to look forward and improve the management of the DHS vehicle fleet in a number of ways. For example, I see tremendous opportunity in our vehicle telematics initiative on the southwest border, where beginning this year, we'll start automatically receiving timely, accurate vehicle diagnostic information, fuel consumption data, and utilization on over 17,000 vehicles. This information will be sent every time one of our vehicles fuels at one of our 68 upgraded fueling stations on the southwest border. While it's clear we still have work to do, by working together and identifying and collaborating on best practices, I'm confident we're headed in the right direction. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Chair, thanks you, Mr. Chalecki. Chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes of questioning, or maybe as much time as I may consume. Our subcommittee staff analyzed data on DHS's vehicle fleet by component and found that FPS had far more vehicles to officers than other components, as well as more vehicles to officers with authorization to commute from home to work in fiscal year 2014. In particular, we found that FPS provided more than twice as many vehicles per officer than the Border Patrol, who is charged with securing over 6,000 miles of border. Even more telling is the number of vehicles for every officer provided with home-to-work privileges, where FPS provided 1.5 vehicles per officer, or 3 vehicles for every 2 officers with home-to-work privileges, compared with Border Patrol's 12 vehicles for every officer. 12 for every officer, compared to 1.5 to every officer. Mr. Patterson, quite honestly, I understand that maybe this is how it was when you showed up and you're working your way through it, but I find it hard to believe that you can justify having twice as many vehicles for every officer than U.S. Border Patrol, and has a ratio of 12 vehicles for every officer with home-to-work privileges. I mean, how does FPS's mission literally require more vehicles than Border Patrol's mission?
Yes, sir. First of all, I have about 1,000 law enforcement officers, a little over 1,000 law enforcement in all 50 states, as well as U.S. territories. The total landscape of federal facilities that we have to protect is vast. I have some of my officers who have to transit places like the Midwest that take 3 to 6 hours one way to go conduct business at the facilities that they are responsible for. According to the IG, we are about two vehicles or 100 vehicles over the of excess vehicles, as has been stated. That's about 2 vehicles per state, 2 excess vehicles per state, given the vast mission that my folks have in servicing those 9,000 facilities. We do a lot of traveling between facilities, trying to get the work done of ensuring the oversight of our protective security officers in those facilities, conducting training, active shooter training in those facilities, doing physical security assessments in those facilities. So our folks are on the road a lot, getting that work done. So vehicles break down. We must have vehicles as a backup if, in fact, these particular vehicles break down, and they do break down. I have a pipeline of about 150 folks waiting to go to FLETC that when they arrive at their home station, we have to provide them with a vehicle. I think given that dynamic, 100 vehicles, excess vehicles, is not excessive.
So let's just talk through this a little bit, because I think it's appropriate. I understand you have very mission-specific requirements. We all get that. And in my opening statement, I outlined the vast number of buildings and properties that you must deal with and how vital, and I use the word vital, your mission is, and I mean that sincerely. That having been said, are we to believe somehow that people that work in the District of Columbia should have the same requirements as the person that might be driving 3 hours one way in, I don't know, pick any state in the Midwest where what you just kind of laid out anecdotally for us might be true? Should it be the same standard that that person gets because of position, regardless of mission? Sir, you are a senior executive, and you have served as a senior executive in the military. So we're counting on you to make decisions that might not necessarily be proper, but would be appropriate for mission completion and in keeping with what we think is appropriate for taxpayer expenditure. And I find no way to justify what you've laid out for me, quite honestly.
So here's the challenge, sir. Let's talk about the Washington, D.C. area. I have 640 facilities that we service in the D.C. area. During a day shift, the regular day shift, there are about 70 law enforcement folks who are on duty. In the afternoon, that drops to about 12. At night, that drops to 5. All right. So let me take the example of the shooting and death of our protective security officer at night in the evening at the Suitland Federal Facility in Suitland, Maryland, at the beginning of this year. I think it was January, February of this year. When that happened, I couldn't call on just those 5. I had to call out every available inspector, law enforcement person that we had to respond to that incident, along with the Prince George's County Police Department, because that's our responsibility. So folks had to be ready to do that, and they were, and we responded appropriately. Not only did my folks have to respond, but my deputy director for operations.
So listen, I get that, and I understand that completely, and I appreciate your diligence and those individual sacrifices, which should be highlighted. That having been said, you as a military commander also know that you have steady state operations where everybody goes about their business as appropriate, day in and day out. But when there's an event and you must surge, people are going to have to be asked to go above and beyond. But that is not the norm. And on those occasions and in those times, you do what must be done. But that's an acute issue and an acute time. And you can't tell me, maybe you can, but have you looked at the cost of surging your force at that time as opposed to providing the access to the vehicles and the use of the vehicles continuously every single year in the happenstance that in one state at one moment for one day there might be an incident? You know, in light of the fact that 49% of the vehicles had fewer than 12,000 miles on them. And then keeping with the other line of questioning, or at least your testimony, when you say vehicles break down, God don't I know it. My car's going to have 300,000 on it by the time I get rid of it. All right, they break down. Have you looked at the cost? Have you looked at how often the incidence of breakdowns has caused you not to complete your mission? And has that been formulated into your calculation about how many vehicles you should have and how they should be utilized?
Yes, sir. We look at that continually. That's all part of how we allocate vehicles. We have a formula that we use. We look at days in use, the annual downtime, and
what's your mission readiness rate?
I would have to get with our folk to give you that.
You look at it all the time, sir. You came here. You knew I was going to ask you that question. You're a military guy.
Yes, sir.
I mean, we run on an army lives on its belly, and so does the Air Force, right? You got to have stuff to do your work.
Right.
So you would come here without knowing your operational readiness rate, knowing I'm going to ask you because you're going to say we need these because things break down, understanding that 49%, half of your fleet has less than 12,000 miles on it. This is a new vehicle to most of America. And you're coming and telling me that you calculated you need 100 or whatever more vehicles plus what you have for each individual, and you have the answer for me, sir?
Yes, sir.
It's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. I'm sorry. It is. You can't come here and make your case without that. And I suspect if you came with that information, my case would be being made. Mr. Roth, do you have anything to say?
Well, simply that during the course of our audits, we did not see the kind of data collection we had hoped to see. There was, as we noted, there was a 98% error rate in the kinds of mileage when you compared the GSA drive-through data with FPS's own data. So to be able to say that that there was an understanding of exactly what the vehicle fleet looked like, how often it was used, I think is not entirely accurate.
Listen, I'm way over time here, and I want to give my colleagues a chance, but I do want to get to some things here. Mr. Chalecki, you mentioned your increased op tempo, and then you mentioned some changes that you're looking at to the vehicle fleet management system and how you're going to do things. Do those proposed changes include a view of the use of personal use of vehicles, those structural changes? I got to ask you, sir, you've served as well. I'm assuming you guys have lived in the real world. I drive my car to work. My wife drives her car to work. Most people, they take transportation. They handle their transportation themselves. They don't get a provided vehicle to them that then people have to call us and say, hey, I saw this vehicle with GSA plates. And you two both know this well because you served, and I've dealt with the same thing at your level. They're at the cleaners, they're at the grocery store. Why are my taxpayer dollars paying for these guys and gals to drive all over God's creation? Why don't they use their own car? So I'm asking you, does the personal use of vehicles, is that included in your calculation moving forward on how you're going to manage your fleet?
Chairman, we don't, on the Home to Work program, we don't allow for the personal use of vehicles. The vehicle it's home to work. We don't buy designated home to work vehicles. We buy vehicles, and Home to Work enables them to do their response mission. We have stringent rules about who gets home to work. We have a stringent process that we went through this year.
Sir, how stringent can it be when every officer has a vehicle?
Sir, we rely on the components because they manage their own risks. So because they have the operational requirements, the mission requirements, we look at those requirements, we bump them up against our standards. But again, they ask for these vehicles.
Sir, the American public, the taxpayer, is relying on you as a senior level executive to look at those risks and make sure they're managed correctly. And when you think that we got to patrol the border, who's got 12 to 1, you got guys and gals downrange fighting the enemy who can't get a vehicle. Like they just can't get, you've been there. They can't get one, you're hoofing it. And you're telling me, we're counting on you, and you're saying, well, they told us that's what we needed, so we accepted it. Is that what you're telling me?
No, sir. They put in the request based upon their mission, and this year we insisted that each component head sign off that these are the vehicles that they need.
And what happens when they sign off and you find out that it isn't what they need? What happens to them?
Well, we go through the process. We look at what do you need the vehicle for? Where's the operational environment? What's the requirement that you're requesting this vehicle? How is it used?
And you're satisfied with all the answers?
Well, we did reduce the home to work by over 500 vehicles this past year.
Well, sir, at this point, that's not, I don't think that anybody's in the public's going to think that's enough, with all due respect, right? We're counting on you. We're counting on you. This is your purview. It is your responsibility. Have you looked at, in your calculation, paying the federal rate for people that work in the District of Columbia to drive to work as opposed to having a vehicle on a taxpayer dime, 50% of the fleet of which has less than 12,000 miles, essentially a new vehicle? Have you looked at that as part of your determination, as part of your study, as part of your improvement plan moving forward?
No, Chairman.
Are you going to?
Yes.
I will tell you this, and I'm going to yield to the gentlelady. We're counting, you are individuals with high experience, right, and high responsibility. We're counting on you to do the right thing, even if you don't have to do the right thing. We're counting on you. If you want Congress to get involved in your business, just keep doing what you're doing, and we will, because we will have to, since apparently you won't. That's kind of where we are. And with that, I yield from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your generosity in taking the time to ask these questions and going over our 5-minute limit. But I'd like to yield at this moment to my colleague, Ms. Torres.
Thank you.
Ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Mr. Roth, can you please describe the process you completed in investigating FPS vehicle mileage, where you identified significant instances of inaccurate or incomplete total miles driven? And how is it possible for a vehicle to register negative mileage? And what steps can FPS take to better monitor or oversee the mileage tracking process?
Thank you for that question. One of the things that we did was that looked at two different data sets for the number of miles each individual car would drive. One is called the GSA, General Services Administration drive-through. And every time a federal vehicle comes up to the gas pump, they're required to key in the mileage of that vehicle, and that's automatically transmitted to GSA, so we were able to access that information. There's a second data set for FPS in which each officer would have to record their mileage, including their home-to-work mileage and the sort of mission mileage. And we compared those two, and then what we found out as a result of that comparison was that there was a 98% error rate between what FPS thought their mileage was and what GSA thought their mileage was. With regard to the negative mileage, I'm as stumped as you would be with regard to that. My assumption is that something got keyed in incorrectly at the gas pump for the GSA drive-through data. But what it shows is that should have been a red flag, that somebody who is managing the vehicle fleet should have taken a look at that and said, you know, we need better data collection. We need a better understanding of what it is exactly our vehicle fleet is doing. And that didn't occur in this case, which was somewhat troublesome.
On the issue of sedans, are they sufficiently sized vehicles to house the necessary FPS officer equipment, particularly in the trunk space? Do you believe that it would, that an officer would have difficulty reaching for, let's say, a mask or storing mobile field force equipment or whatever other type of equipment that that officer may need to do their job?
Well, certainly that was the justification that FPS gave us during the course of the audit when we asked why you needed 97% of your fleet to be SUV. They said that they had equipment and it was required to have an SUV to do so. One of the things our auditors did was they did a representative sample to see whether or not the officers in fact had all their equipment, and they did not. And in fact, we have a chart within our audit that shows exactly how much equipment was missing. And some of that equipment was never even issued. So the idea that all this equipment was necessary, was not belied by the facts that we saw. So that was the first issue. But the second issue is then our auditors actually did a real-world test and were able to put all the equipment into an average-size sedan. Now, there are instances, of course, canines, for example, and other types of operations that would require an SUV. But one of the things I would do, frankly, is walk outside the doors here and look at the Capitol Police. The Capitol Police have a very similar mission to this, in a very similar threat environment as to this. And what you see from the Capitol Police are tons of sedans. They do not rely exclusively on SUVs. So I would say that the proffered reason for the large cars simply was not justified by the facts.
So where are the areas where we could achieve some real savings, whether it's mileage, types of vehicles? Certainly equipment that hasn't been issued to an officer sounds like a very dangerous place for us to be.
I think the department itself has taken great strides since we've issued, this is our third audit report with regard to DHS auto fleet. The department has done a lot of work to try to gain some oversight, but at the end of the day, it requires each component head to act in good faith and be stewards of taxpayer dollars and make sure that, in fact, they have the minimum size fleet necessary for them to accomplish their mission. I have some doubts whether that is occurring throughout DHS, and that is one of the things that we're certainly going to be looking at as we move forward.
Thank you, and I yield back to Ranking Member.
Chair thanks the gentlelady from California. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Larimer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate all of you being here. Mr. Roth, you're quite busy. We see you here a good bit. So, Mr. Patterson, The Office of Inspector General reported that the FPS provides a vehicle to every law enforcement officer in FPS so they could respond to after-hours incidents. First question, are specific officers assigned to respond after hours, or is this something that's expected of all officers at any time?
Yes, sir. It's expected of all officers at any time. Each officer is assigned a portfolio of federal facilities. Okay, so when there is a problem at one of those federal facilities, they are the first to be notified that there's a problem at that facility, and they need to respond to as they feel necessary to that event.
Can you give me an example of a couple of federal facilities that maybe be a federal courthouse?
Oh, yes, sir. We've got
Office?
federal courthouses across the country, Social Security facilities, IRS facilities, any number of facilities that
So
necessary.
every officer that works there will have a vehicle, even if they're just manning the front entrance. There's a federal courthouse that one of my colleagues has a congressional office in.
Right, yes,
And there
sir.
may be 3 officers up front that are there manning the entrance that you go through the metal detector. Each one of those would have a vehicle?
Yeah, let me explain that. The folks that you see at the federal courthouse are inside the courthouse are court security officers. They work for the U.S. Marshal Service.
Okay.
We don't have our officers, our law enforcement folks don't stand post.
Okay.
At any of these, they don't stand post anywhere. Okay, our job is to oversight those folks that do stand post. Okay, so what we do is we hire a number of folk through contract agencies that provide security services at IRS, Social Security, and other facilities across the nation. So our job is to ensure that, one, those folks are, doing what they need to do. Secondly, we have a responsibility to every facility that we protect to ensure that we mitigate the threat at those facilities. So we do a security assessment at each one of those facilities, and it's on a timeline when we have to do this. So every one of our inspectors has to go out and do that. We also have a requirement to do what we call post-inspections. So every facility that has let's say has a guard, protective security officer, and they may have a physical checkpoint, where you have to go through with a magnetometer. Well, we have a responsibility to ensure that, one, that they're doing their job there and that the equipment there is working appropriately. So our folks are on the go quite a bit, and that's what they're doing. They're moving from one facility to another to ensure that what's operating is operating effectively.
So envision that one officer may have 3 or 4 facilities in his portfolio.
I have some officers that have as many as 20 or 30 facilities in their portfolio.
Do you have facilities that have more than one officer
No, sir.
assigned to it?
No, sir.
Okay. On average, how often do you get calls for off-duty incidents?
Oh, every day, every night. Every night an alarm goes off somewhere in the nation at a facility. Every night there is some vagrant who's trying to do something at one of our federal facilities. We get calls all the time. I can't predict where we're going to get calls. To give you an example, we had when the incident happened in Baltimore and there was a riot, we responded to that because the federal facilities were at risk, and our folks out of Philadelphia could not get down in a timely manner. So we pulled folks out of Washington, D.C., which would normally been directed here, to go up there. So we got them out of bed, go up there and help with the protection of those facilities there. So at any given time, we may find ourselves anywhere. Just as when the Secretary said that he started Operation Blue Surge right after the incident in Canada, that he wanted to ensure that there was a higher profile around certain federal facilities in the nation. We pulled folks from all over the country to do that. Many of those folks drove to those facilities. They didn't fly, they drove.
Are these vehicles fully emergency vehicles, lights?
Yes, sir.
sirens?
And that's another thing. We have to ensure that these vehicles meet the standards across 50 states because we never know where these vehicles are going to be. So what we do is we ensure that they meet the national standards for lights and equipment. But the most important thing, as far as I am concerned, every day is officer safety. Officer safety is paramount. So we have to make sure that they have the right equipment and and whatever it is that they need in those vehicles to ensure that they get their safety, are able to do their job and return home.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Roth, do you concur with your investigation of the answer to the question?
The issue we had was with Region 11, which is the National Capital Region, and they operate a 24/7 sort of shift. They have 3 shifts of officers, unlike a typical federal response facility. So, I mean, one of the things I would say is for Region 11, we had real concerns because their policies within Region 11 said you were not going to be called out after hours, and yet they were issued home to work. We asked about that justification, and the answer we got is, well, we need to change the policy with regard to Region 11 to ensure that would be the case. The second thing I would say with regard to the travel, again, all we can go on is the data, and the data says that 47%, I think 49% of all the FPS vehicles have fewer than 12,000 miles a year. So I have no doubt that, in fact, there are many officers who are on the road constantly and putting miles on their cars, but there are a significant number of cars that do not. And in fact, we had 234 cars that had fewer than 5,000 miles per year on the car. So we can only go by the data, and the data shows that there's vastly underused. And as I indicated before, there are about 250 more cars than there are actual officers on duty.
Mr. Chairman, I know I've exceeded my time. If I could be extended, or if someone else would, I'd like to hear Mr. Patterson respond to the issue that was brought up by Mr. Roth is the Region 11 having a policy of not responding after hours, if that's appropriate.
Yes, sir. There is no policy that Region 11 will not respond. There was a standard operating procedure that was in, we have a dispatch facility in Suitland, Maryland. Someone had issued to that dispatch facility that we have 5 folk who are on duty after hours, vice the 60 who are on duty during the day. What they were trying to achieve there was that if you're going to call someone out for a response in the metropolitan area, please try to call one of those first before you break. Now, we've done away with that policy. Right. You will call whoever's responsible for that facility. They will be called. But that was what that was about. It wasn't don't call anybody. It was that if you're going to call someone, try to call one of those 5 first before you call the others.
Okay. And to thank both the gentlemen, and I yield back the time I've already exceeded.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from New Jersey, Mrs. Watson-Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Roth, how long did your investigation take place?
I'd have to get at the exact audit period, but what we looked at was fiscal 2014.
How many people were on that investigation? How many people actually worked for you?
How many people work for me?
Yeah.
About 650, including law enforcement agents as well as auditors.
So how many people were on this investigation?
Let me look real quick. It's actually in the report.
Okay. While you're doing that, Mr. Patterson, this whole question of sort of, you let me know when you want it.
I have it.
Okay.
It's about 6 people, and then, of course, supervisors.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Patterson, this issue of utilization of the vehicles with less than 12,000 miles. 2 questions, I think. Number one is, does it impede your response time if a person has to go to a facility to pick up a car to then go respond to a place of that's an active area?
It absolutely does. And let me give you an example of that,
And
ma'am.
the other question is,
Yes, okay.
As from a policy perspective, if you have this sort of vast differential in the utilization of miles,
Yes.
should you be thinking of a rotation policy where you rotate some of those cars with the lowest mileage out for some of them with the highest mileage and bring the other ones? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
To answer your first question, would it be a challenge for our folks if they had to park their vehicles, then be called out to respond, go back to the office, pick up the vehicles, and then go to the facility? Yes, it would. Just to give you an example, when the shooting happened up at the Suitland Federal Center in January, February, our folks were called out. My deputy director for operations was called out, and he has a home to work vehicle as well, because I expect him to be out there when there is an issue in the city that must be taken care of. I have a home to work vehicle, but I don't use it. All right. However, that night my deputy called me out. He says, "You probably need to come out here because we just had one of our officers killed." Okay. I came out in my private vehicle, and it took me 30 minutes to try to get through the county roadblocks because they were wondering, okay, well, who are you? Why are you here? Because I did not have an official vehicle. Now, I finally got through, but it took time, all right? When we're responding to an emergency, time is of the essence. So to answer your first question, I believe that, yes, it would be a considerable challenge if, in fact, our folk had to go home, go back to work,
And pick up a car.
pick up a
and then-
car, and then try to get to wherever it is they have to go.
So there's been this discussion about 250 excess or surplus vehicles, which were characterized as being excessive,
Yes, ma'am.
beyond your need. First of all, was there a point in time when there were 250 vehicles that could be categorized as of this nature? And number two, did it have anything to do with your staffing at that time?
Well, on any given day, that number is going to change. We have folks who come into, that we assess into the organization. We have vehicles, people who retire. So that number, I don't know of any time that number has been up to 250, but it may have been. I can't say for sure. All right. We do have excess vehicles. I will grant you that. We have them for a particular reason, because our vehicles do break down. I have an expectation that our folks will be able to respond and get to work and do the things that they need to do that the American people, I believe, have expect of them.
So, thank you. So, Mr. Chalecki, do you have any input in the validity of the request for the additional vehicles? So is there some sort of methodology that is employed to determine how many vehicles you need to have in ready that may not be used?
When we do the vehicle allocation methodology that we did in 2012, it asks all those questions. Really, what the VAM is a department-wide survey. So it would ask, in this case, FPS, to explain the vehicle use, how you use it, what's your response, what's the remoteness of the location, and those kinds of questions, which would help drive the actual number of the vehicles.
So it seems to me that there is a methodology that is used to make a number of decisions regarding vehicles. Who gets them, what type of vehicle, where they're located, et cetera. But there was serious questions with regard to Mr. Roth's findings, with regard to your ability to justify their findings of certain omissions or flawed information or whatever. What have you done that responds to particularly the 5 recommendations that were made that I thought had more to do with accountability than whether or not you should have a sedan? Well, I'm going to ask you about that question, a sedan versus an SUV. But all the other issues regarding vehicle use, underuse, misuse, whatever.
Yes, ma'am. I'll begin the answer. Clearly, we didn't do a good job in that we had a completely manual process, first of all, and we didn't have we just completed a fleet management directive, all right, and we are now completely in line with the vehicle allocation methodology, all right. We are also going towards the telematics program, which really it takes all the guesswork out of this. That means that any time an inspector or one of our law enforcement individuals moves that vehicle, it's being tracked, okay? So there's not going to be a question as to when and where and how. We're going to know specifically. So this will help to help us better understand what the overall utilization is on that vehicle and how they're being used, and quite frankly, will help me make better decisions in how we deploy those vehicles and employ those vehicles.
Do you have a justification for choosing or desiring or needing a sedan versus an SUV or an SUV versus a sedan?
Yes, ma'am. 80% of the SUVs that are currently in the fleet of the Federal Protective Service were bought in 2008, 2009, and 2010. That means they were ordered a year before that, all right? So during part of that time, we were under the management of the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement Service. So What we bought was whatever that was offered to us, all right? It was either sedans at that time or SUVs. At that time, we believed that SUVs were the best choice because SUVs gave us a 6-year life. So that meant that we could upfit the vehicle, we would buy the vehicle, and for 6 years, we would have that vehicle and not have to turn it in and not have to replace it. GSA's requirement for replacing sedans is on a 3-year cycle. So that means every 3 years, we would have to replace that vehicle and upfit that vehicle. We actually believe that there is a savings associated with these vehicles over time. Now, it's my understanding that GSA is going to a 5-year life cycle for SUVs, so that has changed. But just to give you an example, this year, we ordered SUVs and sedans. For 2015, 16 SUVs were delivered, 33 sedans were delivered. So we are going through this process. We are looking and evaluating, okay? But we came out of a system before that really we bought what we were offered. GSA says this is the package, and at that time, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement says, okay, this is what you can buy, and this is what we did. So
my last question has to do with the fact that you were overpaying for equipment
yes, ma'am.
that you had already paid for.
Yes, ma'am.
My question is, have you established a mechanism to make sure that that doesn't happen?
Yes, ma'am, we have.
What is it?
Yes, ma'am. What it is that we were still paying the lease fees on the upfitting equipment for vehicles that were purchased in 2007. Okay, it was an accounting. We just missed it. We just missed it, and it was pointed out to us, and we have corrected those accounting processes to ensure, and working with GSA, because GSA recognized immediately that they had been overcharging us, so we're working that out now.
So, Mr. Roth, do you believe that the FPS is moving in the right direction, considering your findings?
We have an audit. I'm sorry, we have an audit resolution process, and we're certainly going to be taking a look at some of the assertions that we've heard since the audit has come out. I will have to say that I was a bit disappointed to learn in preparation for this hearing about the episode that happened this summer, in which we gave the findings to FPS and the department, saying that there was excess vehicle fleets, that they had a significant number of vehicles that had, fewer than 5,000 miles, and notwithstanding that, they refreshed 16% of their fleet. And that happened in August. So perhaps since that time there has been some change, but as a professional auditor, we will remain skeptical.
Chair thanks the gentlewoman. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Clausen.
Thank you for coming. Mr. Roth, we see a lot of you. Thanks for what you do. So if I understand correctly, you all get your fees by charging 74 cents per rentable square foot, right? Am I right about that?
Yes, sir.
And that's going, you all are doing a good job managing, so that fee is going down on a year-to-year basis, correct?
I'm sorry, sir.
I'm assuming 2 or 3 years ago, that would have been 78 cents. You're managers, you're all over your business, you're all over your cars, and so your customer costs would be going down. 74 cents is probably less than it was a few years ago. That's how we all run our business.
Yes, sir. Effective management would drive our costs down. However, we are increasing in personnel for the increased number of threats that across the country. So our personnel numbers have gone up as a result of that.
But your square foot would go up as your customer base goes up. This is a variable.
Yes.
Your price is a variable price.
Well, we're tied to
74
GSA
cents.
lease. Yes.
What's that?
We're tied to GSA lease square footage.
Right. So as that goes up, you get more money.
Yes, sir. But we have when that goes up, that means we have more accountability to whoever the customer is.
Right. But your cost per square foot shouldn't be going up. It should be going down.
No, it can't go down if we're bringing on more folks in order to accomplish the mission.
The variable expenses should match the variable costs.
Yes, sir. But how do
And
we?
your fixed cost should stay the same.
Well, yeah, but our
Roth, am I missing something there? I mean, I've been running businesses my whole life. I've never seen where we didn't get mileage on fixed cost extension by adding customer square footage. Am I wrong? Am I missing something here?
Not that I'm aware of, Congressman.
Okay. So, given that, if your costs are not coming down, particularly as your square footage goes up, because you're not going to add fixed expense at the home office, please.
Yeah, I don't know. I would have to talk.
Let me finish my point.
Yes, sir.
In that environment, you're going to get hit by things like cars. You just do. That's life. I go down to one of my factories and it's not performing, and they got extra cars sitting around. That's a symbol. If this number was going down every year, like the median income for my constituents goes down every year, then the cars don't bother me as much because you're making headway on your other costs. Your variable cost should be going down as your rentable square foot goes up because you're getting billed, you're getting added revenue. Now, that's the world we live in. And so when I looked at this, I said to myself, well, they got too many cars, they're refreshing their fleet, they must be making it up somewhere else. Because certainly they wouldn't be coming to me saying, our costs are going up to the taxpayers and we want more cars. There's no world that I've lived in where you get away with that. So I don't know the ins and outs of how you're doing on the vehicles, but if that 74 cents was going down to 72 cents and 71 cents, because you're making headway on your cost structure on a variable basis, Mr. Patterson, then what's going on with the vehicles seems a lot less sensitive. Mr. Roth, is anything about my math incorrect? Because if it is, tell me. I don't want to get on a limb if my math is wrong.
I don't believe it is, sir.
Fixed cost leverage means something as your business grows. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Mr. Patterson, I just want to revisit the home-to-work transportation in Region 11. It seems hard to justify the $1.2 million in self-reported home-to-work miles driven in FY14 by 142 officers as essential for carrying out its mission. FPS Region 11 has rotational shifts for on-duty officers 24 hours a day, and its protocol states that off-duty officers in this region should not, it doesn't say will not, but it says should not, be dispatched to after-hour incidents. And I understand you had one. They couldn't get here from Philly. This is your testimony, so you pulled them out of Washington, which is presumably Region 11, correct?
Yes, sir.
But that's one incident. That's one incident. That's not every single day. So it's hard to justify $1.2 million, or correction, 1.2 million self-reported miles. Hopefully they're correct, but that's an awful lot of miles. It says nearly 57% of the fleet's overall miles driven are home to work and cost Region 11 an average of about $300,000 per year. 57, almost 60% of your miles are driven getting to work, not doing. That's how people see this. I don't know how else to say that. I just don't know how else to say that. That's how I see it. That's how people see it. Now, I understand it's inefficient when you're trying to get to the site as an official and you got to be stopped by the police and so on and so forth. I mean, I truly get that. But you're in charge of this operation, right? So to me, you know, we've been through this, especially you guys as military guys. You're managers. So if it's not working the way it is now to do the mission and complete your mission and save the taxpayers the money, or at least charge them the minimum, then you got to change how you operate your mission. Maybe you should have a quick reaction force in Region 11 so that when that happens, you don't get detained because they are in the vehicle, but not every single person is driving, so that 57% of your miles and your cost in Region 11 are going to drive to work. You understand how that looks out in the real world, Mr. Clausen? This is a guy that made the bottom line, that ran businesses. That's how it looks to his constituents, taxpayers. And when he talks about the square footage price, and when the secretary comes in for Homeland and says, we need more money to protect the American people, and we get a report like this, what am I supposed to think, and how do I go in a town hall meeting and tell my constituents that we're doing the best we can, that they know we're not? They see this stuff too. The reason probably Mr. Roth, one of the reasons Mr. Roth took a look at your organization is because people call in and say, this organization is wasting taxpayer money. That's why they do it, because they see it. And they count on you, senior level executive, SES guys, making a lot of money compared to average working people, just like me, making a lot of money. They expect accountability and they expect results. And if you're not getting it under the current paradigm, I get it that when you showed up, these vehicles were already coming. I get that. We're not holding you accountable for that. That's the way it is. But moving forward, when I hear that you guys aren't going to look at this home to work program in as one of the improvements you want to look at, when you're not bringing in your operational readiness rate, when you're telling my counterpart here from New Jersey that vehicles break down. Meanwhile, you got vehicles 47% of your fleet are less than 12,000 miles. Tell me what American driving today wishes, other than they bought a new car, is driving a car that's got less than 12,000 miles or 5,000 miles. That's not happening in the real world. So when you tell me they're breaking down, you need to tell me how many incidents you didn't make it to because your vehicle broke down. Can you tell me that?
No, sir.
So you can't defend yourself, and I'm not going to defend you, all right? If you're going to come and make a claim like that, you better bring something, but you're not bringing anything. And so I don't mean to be up here being a curmudgeon, but our job is oversight for the taxpayer, to make sure you're getting your mission complete and you're doing it at the least cost. And quite honestly, it doesn't look like you're doing it. You might be getting your mission done, but everybody can get their mission done when they have unlimited resources, which is what you have right now. You have unlimited resources. That's the appearance here. And then the secretary is going to come and say, we need more. No, we don't need more. We need to do it correctly. Let me ask you this, Mr. Chalecki. The subcommittee staff analyzed fleet data from several components and found that while FPS has over 100 extra vehicles in its fleet, other components do not have spare vehicles in their fleet. Specifically, neither Customs and Border Protection. You would admit and agree that's a pretty important and visible topic at this moment, right? Or the TSA, the face of the Department of Homeland Security. Neither one of those two very critical agencies have spare vehicles, and neither assigns vehicles directly to personnel. What makes you folks any different? Why is your mission different? What are we missing here? Am I missing something? Mr. Chalecki, am I missing something? Yeah, Mr. Patterson's been on the hot seat here. Why don't you take some of the heat?
I appreciate that, Chairman. No, the other components don't have spares. Again, the FPS mission requirements said that because of the remote locations that they're operating from, they can't afford to have a breakdown of a particular vehicle. In this case, the LE1s. These are the pursuit vehicles that you can't just go downtown and rent a new one. If it breaks down and you only have a couple of agents, those agents aren't able to do their job. And that's why we have that, they have a sparing methodology at MPPD that they use to justify that. I think it's reduced slightly down to 92 vehicles, but that's their methodology that they're using.
So just a couple thoughts here, not to just be critical for the sake of being critical. When Border Patrol, and I don't know how many miles their vehicles have on them. I don't know what their maintenance condition is. When they've got to chase somebody and the vehicle breaks down, that's not good, right? We wouldn't want that to happen to them either. So they could come and say, look, we need 100% all the time, but somehow they're able to get their mission accomplished at the 12-to-1 ratio. So I just beseech you, you must take a look at this, because if you don't, we will. We understand you got to complete your mission, and vehicles break down, but I think Ms. Watson-Coleman made a very common sense statement. If your vehicles, if half of them are less than 12,000 miles, and you've got some out there that are being driven every day because somebody's driving 3 hours one way from this place to that place, you guys are managers. You should be looking at this and say, well, holy smokes here. One has 5,000 miles on it and is sitting downtown all the time with leaves around the tire, and this guy's driving 300,000 miles on it. Why don't we move this one over there? And you're going to say, well, they got different state requirements. Let me ask you this. Does your data include the different state requirements that disallows you to move vehicles from state to state? Because if you don't have that, you can't come here and make that claim to either me or Mr. Roth. If you've got it, bring it. Do you have it?
No.
No, right? So we don't mean to be overly harsh here, but understand we're the stewards of the taxpayers' money. You're right there. You're going to charge other agencies taxpayer money to pay you for the business you do to protect them, as you should. But we required you to use your best judgment, not just, well, this is the way it was done, and it's a little too difficult, and, well, I don't want to be the bad news guy, so I guess I'll let Congress be the bad news guy to tell every agent he doesn't get his own, or she doesn't get their own vehicle. If you want to take it that far, I guarantee you somebody here will do that for you. We don't want to tell you how to do your business. We don't. We don't want to have this meeting again. We don't want to be here again. You don't want to be. We would rather you be out there managing these people that are protecting us. But if this continues, if Mr. Roth brings this report again to us next year and it's not substantially different, we're going to do the same dance. And there's probably going to be legislation that gets in your business that's going to be bad for all Americans. It's going to be bad for all of us. I appreciate your time. Let's see if we can end this thing so you can get out of here, since we've wasted a lot of your time here today just waiting on us. Chair thanks the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. Members may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to these in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7E, the hearing record will remain open for 10 days. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.
I don't want to be around you when you're upset.
I'm not upset.